Hi, it's Mike Gastineau here for Swinomish Casino and Lodge, one of the title sponsors for iconic Sonics and a great place to get away from the hustle and bustle of Seattle. Just an hour north of the Emerald City and just outside of Anacortes on Highway 20. Beautiful views of Padilla Bay and Mount Baker and fast-paced gaming. Great entertainment, terrific food, a perfect getaway place for you and your friends, the Swinomish Casino and Lodge. When you need your next getaway, go to SwinomishCasinoandLodge.com. Tell them Mike Gastineau sent you, and be sure to check out the Iconic Sonics podcast and our great conversation with several Seattle Supersonics from the past, the present, and the future.
Truth Plus Media.
Welcome to a new edition of Iconic Sonics. I'm Mike Gastineau, your host, and our guest today says here is Dave Grosby from Seattle radio. He's a legend, iconic in some words. And Dave, Mr. Grosby, good to have you on the show. It says here you're going to win the Keith Jackson Award tomorrow night. What would your career have meant without me? Let's start with that.
Well, Mark, you're one of my favorite New York Jets ever. So I just want to say that it's just a thrill being on your show.
Yes.
And no, it's going to be fun winning that award with you tomorrow. 14 years together on the air, and more than that as friends. You know, more than 30 years as really good buddies up here in the Pacific Northwest. It's interesting. We both came here from different places in our life, and both wound up making a great home for ourselves here. So it's a lot of fun to do this with you, pal.
I thought one of the big things that for both of us, both in the solo shows we did and in the show we did together, and you were the first one to verbalize it. You know, we were in a brand new place. Sports talk radio didn't exist. We were helping invent it, like other guys around the country and other gals around the country. People were, we were making it up as we went.
Right.
One of the things you said, you came in 1991 on a Monday afternoon in October after a Seahawks game. And you said, God, I had so much fun. I sat in the stands yesterday and we heckled Elway and I met a bunch of listeners. And I don't remember us both saying this, but I think a little light bulb went off in our wee little minds saying, we don't have to sit in the press box. You don't have to cover sports the traditional way we've been doing it. And for us, it actually made more sense to sit in the stands with the fans and to go to pregame stuff and postgame stuff. That's who was listening to our show, not the athletes. I remember you saying that, and I was like,
yeah,
God, that makes a lot of sense. And it'll lead us into our Sonics discussion here. But I think that was a big thing for us in terms of why we worked the way we did.
I do too. And it was, in my mind, it made perfect sense for the business we were doing, exactly what you said. I mean, we weren't necessarily doing post-game interviews. We were having guys on the next day if that was going to be the deal, or a day after. So you didn't have to cover the game in that way. You could record it at home if you wanted to see what you would miss sitting in the stands. But it was absolutely my feeling was, we were doing the show for the people who were watching the game, and as much as we could share their experience, the better. And I kind of, made that a philosophy of mine. I mean, I studiously avoided going into press boxes for the most part after that. And I love doing pregame, get-togethers with people and did them for years and really had a chance, I think it helped my career a lot. Got a chance to meet a ton of people, a ton of fans, and definitely you did get the feeling of what crowds were like. And it was very, very useful for the Sonics because, really the press box was different in basketball. It was just a row in the arena. You were still around it, but to be a part of the crowd during the Sonics, when especially the first couple of years I got here, they went through such a dramatic change was a fun experience to see a crowd just absolutely take off as they did by the time the mid-90s arrived.
Well, I mean, there's a flashpoint. I mean, you can talk about when George was hired, but when George was hired, he was, he wasn't unknown. People knew George Karl, but he'd been in Spain, he'd been in Albany, he was off the radar. Who knows? Is this guy this guy's replacing Casey Jones and things are going to get better? And who knew? Well, they almost instantly did. I mean, he really connected with these guys and they got rolling. But the flashpoint to me will always be that last week in April. The Sonics go down to in 92. The Sonics go down to Golden State, win the first game, And then the second game, Golden State kind of beats the Sonics up. They're like, we're the 3 seed, and they get physical. They really rough the Sonics up. And it's like, yeah, this looks like Golden State's going to take care of this. And in game 3, the Sonics punched back, and the ultimate punch, and it was the flashpoint of the next 7 years, in my opinion, was that lob pass from Peyton to Sean near the end of game 3. It didn't clinch the game. Sean still had to hit 4 free throws to win the game. But Dave, that night in that building, a team and a town began to fall in love, I thought. And it just, the electricity coming out of the building that night, I remember thinking, well, there's no way Golden State's winning game 4 now.
Well, and then hearing the Calabro call afterwards as well,
Right.
defies gravity, the whole thing. Yeah, it was interesting, just to step back a little bit. I got here about 6 months before you did. So I got here the last part of the 91-92 season, which was Peyton's rookie year. And it was really interesting getting here because, the team hadn't won for a while, even though they'd been in the Western Conference Finals. They had a losing record with Nate McMillan as a rookie point guard a few years back. And they weren't really winning under Casey Jones. And people were really, really disappointed. And we're on Peyton. I remember the first 3 months, I got here after the first 3 months, and they were on Gary Payton because he wasn't able to score. And I remember thinking, geez, you got a point guard who can play defense, which back then defense actually mattered in the NBA. And if you played it well, it was a big plus. And geez, you've already got your point guard doing the toughest thing, and you could see how interesting a player Kemp was. And then Bob Whitsitt started making some deals and started trading some guys, and you did it, week after week. You saw guys go, and which was interesting. They played, I think it was Portland in the playoffs that year, and didn't make it. But you saw the things coming together, and then you had this young team just kind of, you were here then, just kind of straining at the bit. And George was hired, and it was funny. I was down in Sacramento when George was the coach of the Warriors, and that did not work out well for him. And in fact, he took out Joe Barry Carroll's locker,
Right.
Infamously his last day. So I knew who George was when he was hired, but I thought, wow, I mean, this is a guy who and Joe barely cares was hardly a guy to say that he couldn't get along with players with. But you kind of wondered the last time he was in there, he didn't get along with the guys. So it was a really intriguing choice by Bob Whitsitt, really interesting choice. And you were exactly right, though. I mean, they went, I think, 27-15. I mean, they were much, much better. And that dunk especially, and really got them going. And the magic carpet ride, that Calabro called, it began really with that series. I agree with you. It was a very special time. And you knew when you had Peyton and Kemp, who had figured it out at that point, you had something really, really special going.
I thought too, I look back, I've been very reflective as we approach the Keith Jackson Award and thinking about our careers here, and to quote our old friend Bob Blackburn, I'm not done yet. The Coliseum, I'm glad I got here and got to see 3 seasons in that building. That was a character. That was an old NBA throwback building, no suites, no club seats. It felt a little more equal, for lack of a better phrase. You could go in, you could sneak around, get into good seats, that kind of thing. And that 92-93 season, 93-94, I mean, they were so much fun at home. They won all the time. But the building itself, Dave, I'm not saying Key Arena wasn't better, and Climate Pledge Arena is we're in a different century and it's a different building by that. But the Coliseum was a cool place.
I wouldn't compare them because they're built completely different ideas. The Coliseum ultimately was built for fans, just fans going to the game, not
Right.
fans being able to sit down and have dinner, not
Right.
fans being able to sit in a bar and do what. Fans, they had the Sea First Bank was the only kind of private room they had, and they had a big bar underneath the stands. It was like NBA arenas were like back then, and it was closed, and it was tight, and it was sweaty, and it was dark over the seats, and it had everything going missing from the old 60s arenas was the pallor of smoke hanging in it. And then have people smoking in the arena by the time I got here. But it was a great old arena, and when it would pack, when they say pack to the rafters and the rafters were shaking, that's what it was. And that's what it felt like. So yeah, it was. I thought it was a perfect place to have the energy going, and they did. I mean, they really did get the crowd going. It was, you can't say enough about the style of play really dictating the fact that the fans came roaring back. This was during a time when the Seahawks were struggling. Chuck Knox was gone. Tom Flores was there. They had, in fact, they hit their nadir. They had a 2-14 season in 91-92, and the Mariners had hired Lou Piniella, so they were kind of coming a little bit. So there was a little bit of excitement in the town, but the Sonics were number one. I mean, they were, by George's first full season here, I think they won 55 games, if I remember right, 54, 55 games. They were flying high. I mean, they were flying high, and the Coliseum was absolutely the place to be. That was the other fun part of it too, Mike, as you all remember. There were plenty of places around Queen Anne to hang out before and after the games, and that was a big part of the experience. Was going down to Queen Anne and being there an hour before the game and being there an hour after the game. It was just a fantastic time.
Well, you and I think it was our old friend Dan Zucker invented the Rally in the Alley, which took place at Jalisco's, which is still there. It's what Plaza Garibaldi now is the name of the restaurant. Yep. It's a great Mexican restaurant, and they set up some tables in their back parking lot, and they called it the Rally in the Alley because an alley went between our building where we worked and a Mexican restaurant that served us all free drinks, which was really an example of how to maintain your health and your good vibes during that time. We all spent so much time, particularly '96 when they got to the finals. But I mean, and it's the old thing for anybody when you reminisce a little bit. Well, you were younger, you felt better and all that. But it was a fun, electric night. And really for about 3 or 4 years, that place was just so much fun.
Well, and it got known. I mean, you had I remember Flip Saunders coming in there when Minnesota had that series, and you had other guys from other teams hear about it and come in there. Which was something wild, and yeah, hearing the sound, it was right behind our building, so I mean we could see our building right behind it. During those times, I mean, of course, when the Utah game happened and Calabro poured the 2 beers over your head, right in the back of it, it definitely became kind of a flashpoint place to celebrate. It was right next to the station, and that was the other thing, which I'm sure you've mentioned, is that the radio station and the Sonics were one and the same back then.
Right.
Barry Ackerley owned us both, and we were in the same building, so. We had a chance to see those guys, a lot. They were just a floor up from us. So it was a very close knit kind of circumstance. And it was interesting that, considering what sports radio is like now, Barry Ackerley back then used to get us together in a room before the year started. He'd say, "All right, ask me anything you want," and then said, "Look, I hired you guys to be talk show hosts. I want you to call it as you see it." And it's hard to imagine a team owner saying that, especially when he owned the station, but he did. And it kind of gave us a license to have a little more fun, and we did. We took that license and ran with it.
Yeah, and we did. I think there was also, a little bit of common sense that factored into it. But I will say I've always thought that KJR's success, the success you and I enjoyed, the others who have worked there to this day, their success is predicated on no one ever was told what to say or what not to say. Now, again, you packed a little common sense when you sat down.
Sure.
The people who ran the station understood that if this thing's going to work, you got to let these people say what they want to say. And if they go over a line, it can be tough. But there was never, I don't think, an instance where somebody said, "Here's what I want you to say. Here's what you've got to say today."
No. And that was, that was an Ackerley thing. And after, when I think it was Bill was running the things, when they had that great year and went to the finals against the Bulls, I'll never remember saying on the air that, if the Sonics beat the Bulls, let's be honest, it would be the biggest upset probably in NBA history. And him calling me right after the show, and I'm going, uh-oh, I've talked to Bill occasionally, but this could be a problem. And him just saying, "Look, why are you saying that? We won 65 games." And I said, "Well, Bill, they got Jordan back. They won 72. It's no matter who they were playing, this is going to be the narrative." And he was like, "Well, okay." And I was just curious as to why, but that was it. That was it. Right. So it was. Like you said, it was the freedom to say what you wanted to say, and look, it did not hurt, and it may have been different if they were a 35-win team, but they weren't. Under George, They were a fantastic team every year, and so it was easy to kind of be on the positive side of things because what you were seeing was great.
It's interesting, there's a couple of what ifs, as always, with the team. I mean, the Sonics were the second best team in that 7-year stretch behind the Bulls. Only the Bulls won more games than Seattle, and the Bulls did significantly win more titles. But the Sonics could have won the title any one of those years. People focus on 94 because it just felt like it was really lined up for them. But any one of those years, they could have won the title. And one of the big what ifs, and we'll never know, but Bob Whitsitt and Barry Ackerley got sideways. I know Bob has said, Barry wanted him to fire George in the wake of the Denver series. And Bob said, "I don't want to do that." And eventually their conversation led to Bob saying, "Look, I won't fire George, but I'll resign if you want me to." And Barry kind of ran with that. it became, he put out a press release, Bob Whitsitt's offering to resign. We're not going to let him resign. And then the next day, Barry said, well, we've got a job opening now. So if anybody, so it got messy quick, like things can get in pro sports. I wonder if Barry, who left us a long time ago, if he'd like to have another run at that, because Whitsitt and maybe Whitsitt and George were headed to a blow up, but George had always had trouble with management, as you know, and for some reason he and Whitsitt just were right together on things. And I think the idea, and nothing against Wally, who came in, and George and Wally never had that chemistry, but I think Bob and George maybe could have clicked for a while and things could have gotten better. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I do think that, look, and I don't know if George would admit it, but he probably would have come to loggerheads with Bob Whitsitt, with any general manager at that point, because, George's ego was running the show. And look, it's a very important thing to have an ego going, to have the belief in doing what you're doing. And he had one, and he had a performance ego as well. He may have run into some issues with Whitsitt, but I mean, they weren't happening at the moment. I mean, Bob completely understood the players that he needed and the players that he didn't need. Did not need Benoit Benjamin, for example, in an early get. He understood what he wanted and what he needed. And yeah, I would agree with you, Mike, that was definitely the beginning of the edges being frayed a little bit on what the Sonics were doing when Wally came in there, because of the fact that you had such symmetry between your GM and coach. And it's like in any circumstance, when a new GM comes in, 9 times out of 10, he wants to hire his own coach. So, that was perhaps inevitable, but yeah, that was too bad. That was definitely too bad.
Right. And you look back on it, there were plenty of instances where maybe cooler heads could have prevailed. Maybe Bob was going to leave anyway. Bob had won the Executive of the Year award. He was underpaid by GM standards, and there were at least 4 or 5 teams supposedly snooping around. So maybe Bob was going to try and leave anyway. He's still coy about that a little bit. Again, it's what you do as a sports fan, right? You look back and go, well,
right.
What if Sean Kemp hadn't gotten sideways over his contract, which, by the way, his union prevented the team from renegotiating. When they brought in McElvain, and Sean wanted more money, rightfully so, but they said, look, the way your union structure right now, we can't do anything for a year or two. And there are, and still to this day, it's one thing the league still has in common, Groz. There's so much ego, and it's on all sports now with the money, that you battle that in addition to all the other day-to-day things. You're battling ego all the time.
Well, and that was the beginning of the period that the league and all sports are in now, where players really had a lot more in dictating where they were going to play and when they wouldn't play. And you see teams kind of agreeing to move guys more often than you see guys, toughing it out in places. And, that was obviously the most unfortunate pickup, the Jim McElvain one, because, I think you go back and you run through moves they shouldn't have made. I mean, that one is got to be top of the list. It's not something you really had a need for. I understood that Urban Johnson wasn't a great answer at center, but neither was Jim McElvain going to be that either. I mean, he wasn't a guy who was getting 20 or 10 in the league or anything like that. And, you could have seen that it was going to upset Kemp, even though, as you pointed out, I mean, there wasn't any logic to him being upset. They couldn't do anything about it, but he would. And we remember, I mean, it was right after the Chicago series, it seemed like, when they made the move, when he said, I'll never wear that uniform again. And, that was a crushing blow, I think, for all Sonic fans, because that, you had, the first, it was a lot of great players, Detlef and Hersey Hawkins and all those guys there. But we know the beating heart of that particular team was Peyton Kemp. And, that's what made it special. That's what gave them the edge over a lot of teams they were playing. That's what teams had to beat when they came in. And once you kind of took that away, you took a little bit of the aura off the Sonics.
Where do you put Peyton on the list of guys you've seen just in this town? And I mean, let's think about Junior, A-Rod for a few years, Randy Johnson, Edgar Martinez, all the baseball guys, Russell Wilson, the entire Seahawks defense for the Super Bowl season. We saw, Steve Entman. We saw his great last year at Utah. We've seen a lot of great athletes. Where would you put Gary in terms of your list, in terms of favorites and best and all that?
Well, I mean, in terms of favorites, it was probably my favorite because of the trash talking, which got a chance to hear up close on several occasions, which was fabulous, just unbelievable. He was also, I personally, when I saw him play and when I came to town and I told you most people were thinking that he was a waste of a draft pick because he couldn't score on offense. And I saw how good he was on defense. And, I felt really a degree of satisfaction that he became the player he became. I was marveled, never ceased to marvel when he would come out of games, which he did rarely. Frank Furtado would set him up with this crazy device.
Yeah.
Remember that, Gas?
Yeah.
He'd sit at the end of the bench and back would be arched up because he had such a bad back. And he would sit there and you'd be thinking, how is this guy even playing? And he'd come out and play full bore. And I think because he played as hard as he played, this was a town that loved defense to begin with. When I got here is when the Husky team, you may be familiar with them, a national championship Husky team.
Yes. I've heard. Somebody should do a book.
Somebody should do a book about them. But, they were winning with defense. Defense was a chant in the kingdom over the years. So, having a great defensive player was something that Seattle fans related to. And I think the other key thing to mention that Seattle fans really related to was a blue collar work ethic, which is what Gary Payton brought. He played hard, he played hurt, he played every game. So I think, the only thing missing obviously is a championship ring. But from the basketball standpoint, I'd have to put him at number one, although there's so many other great guys, and he's certainly in the top 10 in Seattle.
He just busted his ass every night. And a lot of guys in the NBA you can say that about, but there are also a lot of guys in the NBA who take nights off. I mean,
is that the truth?
The whole spoof with Kareem and airplane is legit. A lot of people say, guys take certain nights off, and it's just how it goes when you play. Now they're even more blatant about it. They just don't play guys. They call it load management. Can you imagine somebody saying to Gary Payton, we're going to do load management and not play you tonight? I think that would have gone over with the club.
Oh, expletive deleted, man. Expletive deleted. Yeah, that is a completely different way the game is being played today. And I don't think it would go over at all with those guys. But I mean, just to talk about the game, I don't watch a whole lot of NBA. We're going to talk about this. And I watched the Game 7 of the first quarter of Game 7 of the Phoenix Dallas thing over the weekend, and then went back and watched a little bit because they kind of referenced Barkley in the pregame, in the game against the Sonics in the playoffs in '93, I think it was. And so I went back and looked a little bit of the '93-'94 era basketball, and it was just reminded that it's such a different game now than then. I mean, it's just Gary Payton wouldn't last 4 minutes without fouling out of a game now.
Right.
It's just such a different game, and it's too bad in my book because I really enjoyed it back then. But no, he would be one of a bunch of guys that would be looking at you crazy if you were talking about taking him out.
Yeah, we had Danny O'Neill on as a guest earlier in the season, and he and I think I know we had Locke on as well, and I asked both of them, should we allow some hand checking back into the game? And their answer, and David in particular, Locke, I mean, he's watching the NBA every night.
Right.
His answer is why. it's fun right now. And your point taken. It's not the way it was, and defense is a different animal now. But he says by doing that, it has loosened up the shooting and it's made games fun. There were a lot of games when we're in the era we're talking about that were ending in the 70s or the low 80s. That's a third quarter score now. I don't know if there's a happy medium. I'm like you. I miss a little bit of the defense, but I got to be honest. It's kind of fun watching when they just get going like a video game. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stand on the other side of that. I mean, I liked watching defense. I liked watching it, and I didn't mind the games that were particularly low scoring. And I didn't think it was necessarily. A lot of times it wasn't bad shooting. A lot of times it was great defense, and I thought it made for a much better game. I mean, I don't think anything is as dull to me as watching guys take 5 dribbles and hoist 3 after 3 after 3. I mean, there's just nothing to it in my book. So I would bring. I like that style better. I, like you, understand entirely why they're not playing that way anymore. And it is very popular. There's no doubt about it. Everyone is liking it. And it is video game like, and that's what's got a lot of people, on board anyway. And it's how the NBA is selling itself with individual stars these days. But no, I'll be the crusty old man and say, like, I wish they played the way they used to play. And which is why I don't think of the modern guys, I think so few could play in the game 20 years ago. Very few. I mean, LeBron would be one guy who definitely could, but I think the physicality would have wrecked the guys. I mean, I watched the Knicks, Reggie Miller, Indiana thing. Yeah. They did a 30 for 30 on, and just to hear the Knicks and Riley and Ewing talk about how if you went down the lane, you were going to get hit, and how it did happen. And then you saw collisions and you saw things where guys would be thrown out and suspended for weeks now. Were sometimes not even called for fouls. back then. So I enjoyed the game more when it was a defensive game, when there was more strategy to it. To me, James Harden has been the worst thing, and I know it's not everyone, but James Harden's basketball is the worst basketball that I think I've ever seen. Just standing there dribbling and then hoisting up three after three it just doesn't appeal to me.
It drives me nuts late in games, in particular, more so in the college game than the pros, wherever in the college mimics the pros now. But when you'll see a team in the NCAA tournament, it's like, all right, guys, you have to win today. You cannot lose this game. And they'll be down by 2, and they have 8 seconds left. They call a timeout, and the play is you dribble the ball till there's 1 second left and then shoot from wherever you are on the floor.
Right.
Like, you understand all you need is a layup here to keep yourselves alive. And it's frustrating to see that.
Well, no bigger change in basketball, college or pro, than the 3-point shooting line.
Yeah.
It
Absolutely.
changed the game. And especially, remember, guys, when it first came in, it was like 24 feet in the corners. It was really a challenging shot, and now it's not. So it's changed the game.
Dave Grosby is our guest on Iconic Sonics. Our thanks to Swinomish Casino and Lodge outside beautiful Anacortes, Washington, and Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. Now, I'm going to tell you, Groz likes a hamburger and Groz likes a casino, so he's happy with our sponsors today. Speaking of crusty old men, we will continue with Groz and get into some crusty old men discussion about the return of the Supersonics as we continue with Iconic Sonics. Iconic Sonics is proudly supported by Swinomish Casino and Lodge, and they're proud partners with Iconic Sonics. They're located on beautiful Padilla Bay, just north of Seattle. Casino, lodge, dining, entertainment, and more. Swinomish Casino and Lodge provides a perfect getaway for relaxation. A full-service entertainment destination, including a 98-room luxury lodge, multi-purpose event center, and casino, open daily from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. with a great mix of slot machines and Las Vegas-style table games. And for the food connoisseur, check out the 13 Moons Dining Experience, one of the finest in the area, a beautiful restaurant with cuisine designed to enhance the flavors of the Northwest. Swinomish Casino and Lodge, check out the best casino in the area with the most outstanding customer service, offering a luxuriant, state-of-the-art experience while maintaining and upholding the cultural identity of the Swinomish tribe. Swinomish Casino and Lodge. Find out more at SwinomishCasinoandLodge.com. That's SwinomishCasinoandLodge.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. Iconic Sonics is fed by Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. What can I tell you about Dick's food that you don't already know? Probably nothing. They're a Seattle legend for serving great burgers, great fries, great shakes. What I can tell you that you might not know is Dick's also has a cool t-shirt now that salutes the 95-96 NBA Finals Sonics team. Take a look at the Sonics t-shirts available through Dick's at Dick's Drive-Ins, their Twitter feed at Dick's Drive-Ins. You'll see the photos. You'll buy the shirt. You'll be happy. Thanks to Dick's Drive-In Restaurants for the support on Iconic Sonics. And our nonprofit sponsor on Iconic Sonics is the Run Freely Foundation, a 501c3 organization founded by our friend Kenny Main. It raises money to help financially support veterans who need limb salvage, medical care, and rehabilitation. Years ago, Kenny suffered a catastrophic ankle injury, and after years of pain, he found relief with treatment in 2017 that got him both walking and running again pain-free. With that discovery, Kenny wanted to help others in pain, and the Run Freely Foundation was born to help provide the care he received to those who cannot afford to cover its costs. You can find out more and get involved with this great organization at runfreely.org. The Run Freely Foundation, proud sponsor of Iconic Sonics. All right, Iconic Sonics continues with the Groz, my broadcast partner for a long time. I produced your show for a few years. Then you left and went and chased riches at someplace else. And then you came back and we did a show together for 14 or 15 years. And then you left again. The friendship is 30 years long now. And we've seen a lot in this town. It felt like I'm telling you, in all honesty, one of the reasons in 2012 that when I decided to step away, I'm like, I can't remember what was going on, but I was like, it was the basketball arena. That's right. It was let's get a basketball arena built, get the Sonics back. And I remember thinking, I don't think I have this in me anymore. I've argued to build what was Safeco Field and what was Quest Stadium and Emerald Downs and Key Arena. And I'm like, I don't
try for a racetrack. Remember the racetrack thing?
Yeah, I couldn't do it. one of our things with the show is to keep the Sonics name out there and keep the history alive and all that. And we believe, George, Carl, I talk to all the time, all the guests I've had on debt, and we kind of believe the stars are lining up, and it may be a couple of years, but Seattle has a building now. It's a market that I think the NBA wants to get back into. And the belief of most of the people I think on the show and most people who listen to the show and watch the show is that the Sonics are coming back. And I know from talking to you, you've got an interesting take on that idea and that potentially happening.
Yeah, they're gone. They're never coming back. And if they come back, it's not the Sonics. How's that for an interesting take on it?
That's a good take. Now, why now? And I understand you even would go to the point of saying you're still mad enough about it.
Well, that's it. I mean, Gas, and I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I most definitely go back to, and think about, in the 2000s, the whole Clay Bennett thing. Look, I had the perspective. I came here, roundabout way, but I was in Sacramento in the mid 80s when they went about getting a team from Kansas City. And Greg Lukenbill was the owner of the team, was actually the Sacramento businessman who went and bought 80% of the Kansas City Kings. And, everyone in Sacramento knew why he bought them. He didn't buy them because he wanted to own a team in Kansas City. He bought them because he wanted to own a team in Sacramento. And it was just a matter of time before he did it. And Kansas City didn't kind of put up the fight that Seattle did. They had been down a little bit. And the Royals had been the franchise that had been the Royals before the Kings. They'd already been in a couple of places. They didn't have the kind of tradition that Seattle had. But I saw how it happened. And I knew the minute that Clay Bennett Howard Schultz sold him the team, that was it. And I was astonished. I remember that so many people, we saw legends in this town. So Lenny Wilkins and Bill Russell working with Clay Bennett, and I saw all these guys working with him, and I'm like, this guy is moving the team. Right. He got him to move him. I mean, he did David Stern a favor during the Katrina thing, and let New Orleans play in Oklahoma City for a year. He said he'd get him a team. This is his team. If they're going to figure out a way to leave, and of course, then he comes up with this ridiculous arena proposal that you knew that would never pass muster, and it's dragging on. And to me, at the end of the day, I'm thinking the NBA can't let this happen. They can't let him go. I mean, it's ridiculous. You look at it. You look at the city of look at Oklahoma City. You look at a team that's won a championship. That's in a corner of the country where it's had great fan support, where they've been for 40 years. It's just not going to happen. And even down to the very end, when they went to the court case and said they were leaving, I did not think it was going to happen until the mayor pulled out. And if he had not, if they had stayed the course for one more year, that's when the money had crashed, and we would have seen what had happened. But bottom line is, you're right. I was shocked and embittered when they left, and the bitterness has not changed one bit. I think the NBA screwed up big time. I think the idea of paying the NBA $2 billion for the right to have a team. Are you kidding me? $2 billion to come back to a market that you never should have left? Screw you. Forget it. I wish the Kraken had a better start to their time here, and they may be building for something big. And if they had a big splash, I think it might have made a little bit of a difference there. I think there are some people that feel the way I feel. I think most people probably don't. I mean, young people, don't remember the Sonics leaving, but for me, I've always been able to imagine, and I was surprised that I had this reaction too, because I'm not born and raised here, but it's one of the times I felt like it. But the Dodgers were the Brooklyn Dodgers, renamed the Brooklyn Dodgers, for 41 years, the same amount of time that the Sonics were in Seattle, and that left a scar. And I've heard people say, well, the Browns, they left and came back. Well, the Browns made a deal the following year to come back in 3 years, so they kept their history and they kept all of that. This is it's going to be 20 years at best, right, Mike? 20 years. It's going to be
about 20, I think, and maybe a little under, but close to 20.
Yeah, and so we'll see. But no, I for one, NBA doesn't want to be here. Fine, I don't need you. And look, I may have also been influenced, I should say, by the fact that I started doing college basketball games the year they left. I did Seattle U games, not but that's the same thing as NBA, but had my basketball fix kind of taken care of for the next 10 years.
Right. The how much does the Seattle business community, how much blame should they take? And I ask because, it was no secret that Howard was unhappy with his deal. And Howard Schultz, to me, is right at the top of the pyramid in terms of who was responsible. He owned the team. We had the team. He didn't have to sell it. But then he did, and he sold it to an out-of-town guy. People kind of smelled that this was coming. There were 52 co-owners, certainly, that knew it was coming. I've always thought, and look, it's can't do anything about it. But
Right.
I was always surprised. There's a lot of money in this town. I was surprised that nobody was willing to step up and say, look, the economy's down right now. Maybe the NBA is down a little bit. It didn't go stay that way. Let's put together a group and keep the team here. And I don't know who I could point the finger at other than Joe Businessman, whoever he is, but I sure wish something could have happened when the rumblings were starting.
Yeah, I guess I was always under the impression that those guys were sort of surprised that it happened, and we obviously know Steve Ballmer was interested. I mean, he indicated that quite clearly, the owner of the Clippers at the time, and then kind of was involved in the last ditch to try and make something happen here. But I think in terms of there are a couple of villains, and I think in terms of selling the team, you got to start with Howard Schultz, of course. Right. You find local interest to buy the team. I mean, and it couldn't have been that hard. And I don't know what I don't know what the particulars are of the 52 guys that were with him. I mean, we know he had a small part of the team. I don't know any of that stuff, but I do know that had he sold it to local interests, it would have stayed. It's obvious that it would have stayed, and things would have been figured out. And there were plenty of local interest. You'd have to ask him, and I don't know that he's ever come up with a satisfactory answer. Because we do know that guys were interested, and we do know. I mean, you had one big guy, Steve Ballmer, a guy the NBA would have loved to have, would have walked in and done it. Yeah. So, that's the original sin was selling it to an out of town owner, and it was just, boy, that was a black day when that happened, man. That was a black day.
I think the timing for Ballmer, because he was still CEO of Microsoft, and I think he was worried that the stock might, people might, around the world would go, oh, this guy's buying a basketball team. He's not keeping his eye on the ball. I'm unloading my stock. I don't know. It's like I said, we can't do anything about it. One last thing on this, and I want to talk about your days in Sacramento, because I know some great stories there. Will there be a challenge? Let's say the Sonics come back. Let's say they're back in 3 years, and the arena wants them back. The Kraken is in it. Everybody seems to want the Sonics to come back, except for Dave Grosby. Will it be as much of a slam dunk as we all think, or will it be a challenge? You've got a market that's 20 years without pro basketball. It isn't like you just open the doors. I mean, certainly at first people will be excited, but it's a long-term thing to keep the franchise healthy. Do you see them facing challenges there?
Well, they're an expansion team that loses. It's not going to create tremendous interest. And look, I think you make a very good point. You've got two elements now that weren't here if the Sonics come back. A is hockey, like you pointed out. Which is a direct competition in winter sports. And number two is, you ever heard of the Sounders, Mike? You might want to write a book about them one day too.
I've heard they're good.
You've got the Sounders, and I'm just talking about, in corporate business who get their share of business dollars as well. We all know that they're a success story like no other in terms of all professional sports, but especially in terms of soccer. Soccer is a major league sport in this town. It's major league with its business support. So it's major league, period. So I happen to think that if you bring an expansion team in, you're going to call them the Sonics, I guess, and they go 18-64, and people are being asked to pay $200 to go to the games. They're not going to go flocking to the games because the NBA is fantastic, to come up with an old phrase. So, yeah, I think that there could be some issues. And look, I'm starting with the building. I mean, if you're going to pay $2 billion for the team, you're going to put them in someone else's building? So you're going to need, in my book, unless those guys, that the group that owns the Kraken wants to buy the team, whoever buys the team is going to look to build their own arena, whether it's on the east side or something like that. Because I don't know how it pencils out that you can make sense of it when you're already paying $2 billion just for the right to get the team. So we'll see. But no, I think you make a very good point. I think in terms of support from the business community and in general, they'll have to earn it, I think.
We talked in the first segment about Bob Whitsitt and George Karl, and you knew Bob when he was truly the wonder kid in Sacramento. I wanted to just get a couple of good stories out of you. I know you had grown up in NBA towns. Your dad had a radio station in Denver for a while, but your first real involvement with the league on a professional basis, I think, was in Sacramento. You're a broadcaster. You're covering the team. You worked with the great Gary Gerald, who's still there.
Yeah.
And what a place to break into the NBA as a media guy, because there were so many characters on that team. Their team plane was called Airball One, for crying out loud. I mean, they had a great sense of who they were, and the town, in this case, the town fanatically supported a team that was not very good.
Well, but what they did have, Mike, was they had a magical first year, and they weren't that good, but they had a magical first year, and what that first year was was they made the playoffs. They won, I think, 30, or didn't make the playoffs. They won like 38 games. But they had this thing happen where they started, and you're looking for anything to grab onto. And early on, they started winning games on Tuesday nights, of all things. They were winning games on Tuesday nights. So they were in a temporary arena that only seated about a shade over 10,000. I think it was 10,333. So it was sold out every night. And so it goes, December to January, and they were 37-45 as a team, but they had won all their games on Tuesday night. And so Boston and Larry Bird comes into town. This is Boston at their best. This is the championship Celtics. Bird at his best as well. It's a Tuesday night. Bird misses 2 free throws at the end of the fourth quarter, and the Kings win. And it was one of those, you don't remember. I don't remember too many regular season games from the Seattle Times, and I don't remember too many things in general. But I remember that game, and I remember people going absolutely nuts for that game. And so, yeah, even though you didn't have a championship caliber team, you had a thing to hang on to. This was Sacramento had never had obviously a professional team of any kind before then. Was talk about, people used to say when I had the Sacramento, Mike, in the early 80s, they were going to the city for dinner. And what they meant was they were driving to San Francisco, which is 100 miles away. I mean, that's to
get a good meal.
Yeah, that was the city. That was the perception that Sacramento had of itself even. So this was an incredible thing for the town itself. And then Reggie Theus was probably the best known guy on the team, who came in and said, he's never seen so many farmers in one place at the same time, was what he said after the first game, which everybody loved. I mean, nobody cared. I mean, he's talking about us. He's talking about us.
Right.
So it was definitely like, being a preschool kid, with a new toy. It didn't matter. And so it was a fun team. Eddie Johnson was on that team. Joe Klein was their first draft pick, and he was a great guy. Wasn't a particularly great player, but was a great guy. They connected right away, and the fans loved them. And Eddie Johnson, who wound up playing for the Sonics, was a good player on that team. Mike Woodson, was another solid player on that team. They had some solid players, with Sal Thompson as well. But it was the excitement, the newness of it that just made everyone go nuts, and it was really a spectacular ride.
You talk about the fans; they've always been well known there as being knowledgeable and fun and loud and in your face. And Frank Burkowski, of a later era King, he was with the Kings 94-95. He's hurt all year. He played 7 games. 95-96, he signs with the Sonics and is a key part of that team that goes to the finals and has a great series against Sacramento in the first round. And he said that in one of the games in Sacramento, one of the fans goes, "Hey," he's cussing him out. "Hey, Burkowski, where were you last year when we needed you?" And Brick goes, "As I recall, I was going to the bank every Friday to cash my check." The fans there were awesome. And the executives, the people that ran the team were fun. None more fun than one of the NBA's true characters, Jerry Reynolds. Who, you and I used to love having on the show. You'd have him on all the time. You and Jerry worked together. And the second best basketball player ever from French Lick, Indiana, which is not too bad when Larry Bird's the first.
He was best friends with with Larry Bird's older brother, and that's another story in itself. That year that I told you about, Jerry comes up to me after the Celtic game, and says, "Larry wants to go out and have a beer," and that's a problem. And I'm like, "Well, yeah, he's Larry Bird. It's 1984. I mean, he's the most well-known guy in the world." He says, "But I told him that you might know a dive bar." This is how well Jerry knew me. He knew me very well. "You might know a place that might be low key that he could go to." And I said, "I actually do. I think I know a place. And sure enough, I took him to this place, and it was, I don't know how to describe it because I haven't seen one on TV. It was as run down as any bar that you ever saw them in The Wire or anything like that. It was, right. And I knew the bartender there wasn't a sports fan because I'd gone there. I went there every now and then. So there was a chance that he wasn't going to bug him. And there probably wouldn't be more than 2 or 3 people in there, and one of them would be like a Simpsons drunk passed out on the bar. And so that might be a good spot. It's an hour. It's 10 minutes away from the hotel. Why don't we meet there? And so he said, "All right, that's what we'll do." So we meet at the bar. I can't remember the name, unfortunately. And we go up there, and it's exactly as I described it. There's one person whose head is down on the bar. There's one person sitting in the back, and the bartender, "Well, you're tall, but there's no idea of anything." And so I sit. I don't get involved in the conversation. I sit a couple chairs over and listen to Larry talking with Jerry, and Bert is looking around, and a person comes in and out. 2 or 3 people come in and out. No one notices them. This is unbelievable to him. I mean, and it really is unbelievable to me too. I mean, he's really pretty obvious sitting there at the bar.
Right.
And so finally, after a couple hours, he's ready to go, and he's I'll get a cab, and so he is the guy calling him a cab, and he mentions for me to come over and says, "Hey man, thanks a lot. This was great catching up with Jerry, and thanks for finding this place." And it's like, well, it's nothing. I know dive bars, I guess. So the cab driver at that moment comes into the door, and he obviously is thinking something's going on here, because he's gotten a request to pick up Larry Bird
at this dive bar.
And so he goes in and he's talking to the bartender, and the bartender says, "Who? Larry Bird? That's the strangest name I've ever heard. You're not Larry Bird, are you?" And Bird just bursts into laughter, claps Jerry on the back, and goes out the door.
With the cabbie.
With the cabbie, sure. Who was like, goggle-eyed. It was the only guy that night who recognized him. So, that was funny. And then the other funny thing about Sacramento was that first year, they played, like I said, in a temporary arena. They really didn't have the infrastructure of a city. So the place that people used to go to was sort of out of town. It was a fancy pool hall. And the Kings players would go there. And this particular offseason was the offseason where Dennis Rodman met his first wife, I believe, who was from Sacramento. Akeem Olajuwon didn't meet his first wife, but was dating a girl from Sacramento. So they were in Sacramento at this bar, I think it was called Q's, for the entire year, most every night. And it was you go down to see Theus and these guys shooting pool, and Rodman would be there, and you just had the sense you could hang out with them, and Jesus, so the NBA, so players hang out in town, and it was a completely raw, novice, wide open, eyes open feeling, and it was fun for them, and Jerry was hung in there the first year and was named assistant coach, and actually got a shot at being head coach. Was Bill Russell's assistant behind Willis Reed. And then when Bill left, Willis left, Jerry took over. And Jerry had the idea before anyone really of hey, you know what? We got to take advantage of this 3-point shooting line a lot more than we are. And had Ricky Berry, who unfortunately took his life, and it kind of stopped things. They had Danny Ainge to play, and for a while they had the 3-point scoring record, and just a brief shot. But then he wisely went back into really not the front office, went into the broadcast booth, and enjoyed about 40 years there as Sacramento's favorite guy, even though he was born and bred Indiana Hoosier.
Yeah, and a terrific guy, and great basketball storyteller, and all that. Speaking of storytellers, to bring it back to Seattle. That 90s run, and like I said, I'll emphasize again, the Sonics, they averaged 59 wins a year, and they were in the playoffs every year, and they got to the finals once, and they got to the Western Conference Finals in 93. They were good all the time, every single night, and a good story needs a good storyteller. That. I always thought that one of the characters, and it's not like he doesn't get the credit, but 2 of the characters really were Kevin Calabro and Marcus Johnson in terms of the storytelling. I always said they made good games great, and they made great games whatever's better than great. I mean, they were so good together, and we've had both of them on the show. But their influence on this town was you needed a lead singer, and Kevin was the lead singer.
It was over the top, and especially considering you're in a town which had Dave Niehaus, who was doing such a great job with the Mariners and had forever. I mean, to have a local broadcaster do what Calabro and Marcus definitely as part of that did, was to elevate the product in a way that very few broadcasters can and ever do. It was as simple as this, Gas. When you were at the games and you saw plays, you wanted to hear how Calabro called it. I mean, your goal, I can't wait to go back and hear the call of that game and hear what he said. And it was the soundtrack of those years, and it was hip, and it was cool, and you felt like you're in on something with those guys. They had unbelievable chemistry. I couldn't agree with you more that they were a huge part of the excitement, because you could not listen to Kevin Calabro's voice and hear him call games and not think this was the most exciting thing going on in the world. He just was fantastic at it. Marcus Johnson, jumped in with both feet, understood what he had with Kevin. They conversed at a very high level. They didn't dumb it down for any listeners or anything like that. They played their high wire act brilliantly, I thought. I couldn't agree with you more. It was the best local broadcast team I have ever heard, and I've worked in New York and I've worked in LA. It's the best local broadcast team I've ever heard at the time when you had this fantastic product going as well. I mean, it was certainly one married the other. And I agree with you. I don't think you can say enough about the influence those guys had.
Their chemistry, and it's always tough to kind of to talk about that and to tell stories that people can relate to. But I said one story I tell people, I said, here's how good they were together. Kevin always used to say he doesn't want to use any profanity on a broadcast. Why irritate somebody if you don't have to? And even down to hell or damn, words that have become accepted on broadcasts.
Right.
I was like, I don't want to use that. And Marcus was fine. Okay, yeah, sure, I understand. And one night Kemp does some spectacular thing, and Calabro's losing his mind. He says, he exploded from the baseline, and he darn near hit his head on the backboard. And there's like a 2-second pause, and Marcus goes, he sure as hell did. they both laughed. They knew each other. I don't know. And Kevin had a lot of, James Worthy was good. There were other guys. Lamar Hurd, who he does the games, and he was doing a game with Lamar Hurd one night. They're doing, where are you rooting for the Blazers? And it was somebody at Loch Ness. And Kevin goes, that's where that monster is. And Lamar Hurd goes, yeah, but that doesn't exist. And there's a pause. And Kevin goes, yeah, but tell me if you're swimming there, you're not keeping your eyes open.
Yeah, Kevin can elevate broadcasters, that's for sure. I mean, Billy McKinney, for that matter. I mean, he elevated everyone he worked with, but he had something special with Marcus, that was for sure. I mean, it was just special, and you and I know when you have something like that, you want to recapture it, but it's hard because so much of that is unspoken. You can't talk your way into a partnership like that. It has to be organic. It has to exist, and they simply had it.
You brought a Kevin Durant T-shirt to the show today, and I mean, I've got a Groz with Gas golf tournament shirt, but I mean, look at that. That's badass there. That's 15 years old right there. That's an ultimate what if, and that it can kind of bum you out a little. But boy, you think about if again, it's insane to me that there couldn't be a group put together to keep the team here. Because that Oklahoma City team was really good for about 6 or 7 years, and imagine getting a front row seat to that, to another great Sonics era, whether they'd won a championship or not.
I think that you can rest yourself a little bit on that, in that they would not have done that if they were staying. They would not have completely stripped the team down and said, we won't draw, we won't do anything for 2 years.
Right.
And we'll be fine if they were staying. I mean, to me, that was actually the proof that they were leaving. The conclusive proof that they were leaving was the fact that they were ready to completely ignore who was doing the game, and then fired Calabro from doing the games for that matter. And couldn't have made it more clear that they were exiting stage left. So ironically, I don't think you would have had the team, but you're right. It was something special when Durant came back. He is always going to be in a lot of people's mind. He's a special guy here. I think he knows that. He knows that from coming back for that preseason game a few years back. And Harden, Westbrook, and Durant. I would have had to rethink my feelings about James Harden. But,
well, he was never better than when with OKC. His game I thought was good when he was with OKC.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, I kind of think that was just a happenstance of them being willing to strip the team down and not caring at all what the local fans thought of the team. And they were really bad there for a couple of years. But they were good. And then I think from a lot of people's standpoint, who Danny O'Neil was one. You talked about having him on. A lot of people then took a lot of joy in rooting against Oklahoma City. That's for me. I couldn't do that. It's like, I can't pay attention to those guys anymore. I don't care about those guys anymore. They left. They don't care about me. I don't care about them.
So they don't like you. We used to do a thing on the show called The Groz Sets the Record Straight. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and your answers will live in infamy here. What happens first? Mariners get back to the playoffs, or Sonics return to Seattle?
Mariners will get back to the playoffs.
Yeah.
But not this year.
Not this year. What about how does Russell Wilson fare in his return to Seattle? Does he get crushed, or does he throw 5 touchdown passes and then float up into the heavens, into the arms of Jesus after the game? And everybody's like, did you see what happened?
I don't think there's, in my book, there's no question Russell Wilson is going to have a field day in his first game back, because Seattle's defense is without Bobby Wagner. They're going to be trying to figure out their identity. In my opinion, I think he's going to shred them in that first game. And I don't know if he'll float on, but he'll wind up getting booed pretty severely, I would imagine. But I expect him to have a huge game.
Kraken make the playoffs or Sounders don't make the playoffs? What happens first?
Sounders ever not made the playoffs?
They have never not made the playoffs.
Well, I don't know why that would change. Although I guess Messi playing for Miami is a big deal, but Miami can't be in their division. I don't.
I think he's going to just own too. I'm not sure he's
going to play.
Who knows?
I don't see any reason why the Sounders would start missing the playoffs. So it's not going to be the Sounders, man.
They're amazing, aren't they? What they've done.
It's and you wrote a great book about it. To me, it is the greatest unveiling of an expansion franchise in any pro sport ever.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's really no arguing it. And now as it just continues, because when I wrote it, it was like, well, they're the only expansion team ever to make the playoffs the first 5 years of their existence. And now it's the only expansion team to make the playoffs, whatever it is, the first 12 or the first 13 years of their existence. And they won that CONCACAF thing. All right, final Groz sets the record straight. Whose speech will be longer at the Keith Jackson Award tomorrow night? Will your acceptance speech or my speech be longer? The all the money would be on me, right?
Because I'm long-winded and becoming slow-witted as time goes on. So, just my pauses, my ahs and ums might stretch it out. But I think at the end of the day, Mike will be the one who goes on too long because I'm going to wing it tomorrow, and you're preparing like you always do, right?
I don't know. I'm trying to not prepare. I've tried to learn from you and not prepare, and it's
wow. And I'm trying to learn from you and prepare.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, isn't it, the way it's all worked out? Dave Grosby, who Jerry Reynolds knew well enough after a few years to know he'd know a dive bar. Now, I will tell you, if you sat next to Dave on the light rail from Northgate to the U District, you'd know him well enough to know he'd know where a dive bar is. That's how he is. I love you, guy. It's great talking to you. This is the first time we've done this type of thing in a while, and hopefully we'll get literally dozens of downloads, and I'll make mad coin out of this. So I hope
you do too, and tomorrow's going to be a lot of fun, buddy.
Looking forward to it, Dave. Thanks. The Groz setting the record straight on the Sonics coming back. He says he doesn't want them on all the other stuff as well. And our thanks to him for joining us today on Iconic Sonics. It's all brought to you by Swinomish Casino and Lodge and Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. I'm Mike Gastineau. You can get more information on other episodes and other goings-on with Iconic Sonics by visiting iconicsonics.com.